And here I thought this list was going to be short, but I don't have any more excuses to keep procrastinating on it, especially because I'm going to London next week. The problem with this video was one ungodly image I had to see when I was tackling the script. I said in the previous Catherine video that there were no bad depictions. I was wrong. I should never have watched Henri IV before I was ready. Someone should really have warned me about a certain scene.
Excuse me! You're biting my butt!
No, I'm not.
Yes, you are!
Trust me, it'll make sense when we get to it. So this may be a long video, and there's 3 categories of Catherines I need to get through. The journey has been long and exhausting because there are things that I just can't access due to language barriers. More than ever, I regret not taking French for GCSE. I mean, I wanted to take German. Ended up taking Spanish. If I'd taken French, I'd be able to watch Jean Cocteau without subtitles, instead of being driven to the point of insanity twice a week by a sexist-ass Spanish teacher and a fellow pupil who kept opening the classroom windows in the middle of bloody winter. For context, I was the person who sat closest to the windows. Every time I closed them, he'd open them again. Writing that sentence and having to read it back now made me so angry I had to go and make a cup of tea. Anyway, let's look at Catherine's online legacy. We were so close to actually covering an episode of Doctor Who this time, not just a spin-off. The Massacre was the 22nd serial of the classic series, featuring the original Doctor William Hartnell. It preceded the 12-part story The Daleks' Master Plan. By this time, the Doctor's original companions from episode 1, Susan, Barbara and Ian, have all left the TARDIS, and his companion this time is Stephen Taylor, from the 23rd century, played by Peter Purvis. The story has the 2 of them land in Paris in 1572, where the Doctor disappears early on, and Stephen has to spend most of the story trying to find the Doctor. All the while he's protecting a serving girl called Anne, who knows about the upcoming massacre. When they reunite, Stephen begs the Doctor to prevent the bloodshed, but the Doctor instead just leaves as the massacre begins, and the story ends with Stephen temporarily deciding to leave the TARDIS in disgust, but he changes his mind, and as they dematerialise, they accidentally take on a new companion, Dodo. And that is just my quick summary from reading the Wikipedia article. Catherine de' Medici's part in the story is small, but she is pitted as one of the main conspirators in the events that lead to the massacre. She's played by Joan Young in the serial. The problem we have here is that, like many of the early Doctor Who stories, the massacre has been lost to time, no pun intended. For the Hartnell and Troughton eras, not much care was taken into preserving the Doctor Who serials. Some of them have been recreated through still images and animation, while a few others, like the Tomb of the Cybermen, were miraculously recovered. The Massacre's script was adapted into a novel and later made into a fan-made audio recording, with Peter Purvis reprising his role. The 4 episodes of the serial were shown between the 5th and 26th of February 1966 and gained 25.7 million views collectively in the UK. It was critically praised and has glimpses into elements that will later be explored in the Doctor Who franchise, such as the companion being left alone to navigate their new surroundings, and said companion pleading with the Doctor to change a fixed point in time and space, and the Doctor having to confront who he is without a companion, as well as the Doctor Who main cast playing doppelgangers as well as themselves. In the first Doctor's case, he plays the Abbot d'Amboise, whom Stephen mistakes for the Doctor. The Doctor himself appears to have just gone on a bender for the past 4 episodes. Unfortunately, there hasn't been much confirmation on if the massacre will get an animated recreation, but since the distribution rights were acquired by Disney, I am hoping that, with their proficiency for animation, we will get it recreated one day. The silent movie, The Loves of Mary Queen of Scots, also has Catherine appear in the cast list. Sadly, the movie's not become available yet. The other sort of piece I want to talk about is an opera called Le Duc de Guise by George Onslow, François-Antoine Eugène de Plagnard and Jules-Henri Verneuil de Saint-Georges, which was performed by the Opéra Comique in September of 1837. Catherine was played by Madame Boulanger. Madame Boulanger, but there hasn't been any specification on which voice type she was. She's the first credited female performer, so I would think that she was the soprano. The opera tells the story of King Henri III's assassination of the Duc de Guise in late 1588, as told in 3 acts. Sadly, Catherine doesn't seem to have an opera of her own, even though she would have been right for the picking. Although it does work out well for me, because I'm not spending another video hunting down the story behind a handful of lost operas. We don't need another cursed queen. Le Duc de Guise appears to have had a successful run, but I can't find much else about this opera because it is repeatedly confused with a silent movie called L'Assassin du Duc de Guise, in which Catherine does not appear. Princess of Cleves was based on a 1678 novel of the same name, supposedly written by the then Comtesse de Lafayette, Marie-Madeleine Pioche de Laverne, but was never actually attributed to her due to a stigma at the time towards female authors. La Princesse de Clèves is the story of a 16-year-old heroine who comes to the court of King Henri II and reluctantly marries the Prince de Clèves, but her heart really belongs to the Duc de Nemours. As I haven't read the novel, I once again don't know how Catherine plays into events. The novel was adapted into a 1961 film by Jean Delanoy, with the screenplay written by Jean Cocteau. You may recognise the latter for his earlier masterpiece La Belle et la Bête. So when I saw that his name was attached to it, I was really excited to watch it. I found the DVD for super cheap on Amazon, and I was more focused on making sure it was region 2, to the point that I completely missed the fact it doesn't have subtitles. Honestly, I watched the first scene, which was really pretty with such wonderful costumes, but sadly I could barely figure out what was happening because of the language barrier. I tried to guess what they were saying and attempted to find either a screenplay or a subtitle file online to go with the film. And unfortunately, this is not Rise of the Tomb Raider, so I can't gain proficiency in another language overnight. Catherine was played by Lia Padovani, an Italian actress, and in the opening scene she is featured watching the wedding ball of the titular princess, where King Henri comes in, does his part, and then immediately starts womanising. During the dances, Catherine turns to Mary Stuart, and I did not know she was in this, but I think it's just a minor role, while the future Francois II has already fallen asleep next to his wife. From what I could gather, I think Catherine is telling Mary that at least she won't have to worry about her husband turning his attention to another woman. That's all I can glean for now, because I didn't watch this any further, and I do hope a subtitle cut is available out there. Or I could just learn French.
You don't know what they're saying.
I'm picking it up. Sala seems to mean jerk, and I think Menjula means some kind of spaceship.
Lara and Margot, 1954, sadly suffers the same fate as La Princesse de Clèves. The film still exists and you can watch it on YouTube, but there are no English subtitles. Like the previous film, it was a French and Italian production where Catherine was played by a French opera singer, Francois Rosé. The film was also called A Woman of Evil. I'll talk more about the story of Lara and Margot when I talk about the 1994 film. I can't find much information about this movie, but in the United Kingdom it was given an X certificate. I imagine this would have been the equivalent of a 15 or an 18 today, or an R rating in the US, or maybe NC-17. Granted, I imagine the violence featured in the St. Bartholomew's Day massacre scenes is mostly the reason why this certification stands. I didn't realise that this was before the BBFC introduced the universal to restricted 18 certificates. For clarification, unlike in the US, the oldest certificate a child under 12 can go to in the cinema is a 12A, but they have to have an adult with them. And that's basically our equivalent to PG-13. I did always find it crazy that American kids can go and see an R-rated movie as long as they have an adult with them. Because there are some things in R-rated movies you just don't want to see with a child. Pearls of the Crown was one I really wanted to watch, and I would have been able to if I was in the right location. This is a 1937 French comedy film where Sacha Guitry, who wrote and directed the film, exists as different people in different time periods, tracking the history of pearls from Henry VIII's crown. The film also explores events that take place at the Tudor court, so hopefully I'll be able to watch it by the time I get round to that Anne Boleyn redux. Catherine is played by Marguerite Moreno, and seeing as her mother is credited in the cast and a child actor is credited as Catherine's younger self, I imagine it shows a wide span of her life. And the only place I could find the movie was the Criterion Collection, and I was willing to take advantage of a free trial just so I could watch it, only to find out that this website does not offer membership to the UK, and that really annoyed me. I was looking forward to this one, but we can always try to find it again at a later date. Same with the other two movies in the segment. Either we can learn French or find a subtitled version. There has to be one out there. I want to believe.
Quelle sorte de fête est cela? Musique!
Le diable en personne.
J'ai à vous parler. Majesté.
There aren't really enough Catherines to go into a lightning round cameo section, so this rightfully sits at the very, very bottom. Henri IV, or Henri of Navarre, was originally envisioned as a 3-part mini-series showing the life of King Henri IV from his turbulent childhood right up until his assassination in 1610. It has a bit of a messed up release depending on which country you're watching this in. I was watching the 2.5-hour movie version. It boasts the cast from varying countries where the actors mostly communicated in English during production. Each actor spoke their lines in their native tongue, which was then dubbed into French. It wasn't until I knew this bit of trivia that I realised something was a little off in the way that the actors were talking. Once you see it, you can't really unsee it. It reminds me of when you watch a 3D anime where they can't cut corners on the mouth movements anymore, so you can tell that the sound they're making isn't actually them. Catherine is played by a German actress this time. She appears as a looming ominous presence over Henri, and her children are a mess. Only Charles, Margot, Henri III and Hercule are present. Many interpretations that feature the St. Bartholomew's Day massacre tend to exclude all but the bare minimum of Catherine's children, which I guess isn't hard since half of them were dead by then. The Valois court is typically shown as a den of perversity and religious hypocrisy, just barely held together by Catherine's authoritative glare. All joy is sapped out of a room when she enters it, and her maternal affection is only skin deep. There are very few, if any, scenes that give her sympathy. The Valois family is shown to be the orchestrators of their own downfall, which Henri just happened to benefit from. Charles is weak and easily manipulated. Henri III is self-indulgent and incompetent, while Hercule is, as his brother puts it, insignificant. Margot, meanwhile, is seen as an embarrassment and a waste, seeing as she has tarnished her own reputation by taking so many lovers. And also she's infertile, so in their eyes she's also useless. This movie is like a cross of the worst elements of the Stars series, mixed with that god-awful Gunpowder Treason and Plot miniseries. Endless gore, sumptuous nudity, people act like caricatures of their original selves, and certain aspects that make you very uncomfortable and wonder if someone put their fetish in so they could watch it over and over again. In this movie's case, I don't know whose idea it was for Charles to spank Margot's bare ass and for Catherine to then bite her daughter on the butt cheek, but Joe Bayer, German name, Joe Bayer, the director, insisted it had to be a real bite, so I'm going to point the finger at him.
Dude, what the fuck is wrong with German people?
Although, to give those other series credit, at least they didn't use the Wilhelm scream during a very serious, violent massacre.
Votre mariage ne les a pas apaisés, au contraire. Je crois même que... Vous croyez quoi?
This film uses a few popular sound effects for this movie, making me wonder how big their budget was. I noticed this bird sound effect. I always associate it with the Black Isles chapter in Tomb Raider Chronicles. I mean it when I say people act like they're caricatures. Even Margot points this out. Nothing says exaggerated Catherine de Medici by having one of her scenes open with her watching a murder of crows flying over Paris, feeding on the corpses she's responsible for. Catherine's final scene comes about 100 minutes in. Henri III is cowering in his chambers, banishing Margot when she calls him out on his uselessness, and the Duc de Guise enters and Henri orders his men to kill him. And Catherine comes out of the shadows, but I must admit the lighting in the scene is spot on, and tells him that he must make peace with Navarre before she once again retreats into the unknown, representing her death. Afterwards, Henri IV arrives at his chateau, where he learns that Catherine has died. So even though she was brutal and sadistic, it is made clear that Catherine did it all for her children. Even though they have all died or disappointed her, her son's constant failure to see the bigger picture is what leads to his assassination. I really didn't want to hate this movie. I was looking forward to it, but it was just not entertaining at all. Now this is entertainment. I'd heard of this movie before, but never watched it until now. Intolerance was director D.W. Griffith's attempt to respond to critics for the fallout of his previous movie. You may have heard of it. It's a little-known project known as The Birth of a Nation.
Hey, I know avoidance slopes when I hear 'em.
Quick explanation if somehow you've never heard of it. The Birth of a Nation was a silent movie from 1915. Some cuts are over 3 hours long. It's set during and after the American Civil War and plays up a fuck ton of African American stereotypes while portraying the KKK as the good guys. Griffith thought he had nothing to apologise for, despite the backlash from the NAACP. Sadly, of all the silent movies that were lost over the years, The Birth of a Nation was not one of them. Intolerance works as a sort of anthology, exploring the theme of intolerance in 4 different time periods and how it led to widespread human suffering. Rather than tell one story at a time, the movie goes in and out of time periods, from the fall of the Babylonian Empire in 539 BC, the teachings and the crucifixion of Jesus, the St. Bartholomew's Day Massacre, and a contemporary story of self-righteous wealthy women and greedy men making life hell for a young married couple, who take away their baby and almost has the husband executed for a crime he didn't commit. Of the 4 stories, the contemporary story and Babylon take up most of the screen time. Catherine has a very small appearance, but is once again shown as being the one to push her son towards the massacre. The French court is seen very briefly, and the sets mostly feature the interior of the French court as well as the interior and exterior of a house in Paris. This chapter mostly focuses on 2 young lovers, one of whom is known only as Brown Eyes, who is a Huguenot. There is a mercenary soldier who also desires her, and he ends up murdering her during the massacre. Her lover, despondent, goes out into the street carrying her body, and although his dialogue cannot be heard, he is likely repudiating the soldier's actions, and he is shot by them in cold blood. Even though Catherine is not shown, the little action she does creates a huge impact on so many innocent people. This small story of 2 tragic lovers was just one of many that happened that night. This is repeated through all the stories. It's basically a manifestation of that quote,
"But for me, it was Tuesday."
Margot was also featured for a few moments. Her actress, Constance Talmadge, played a more prominent role in the Babylon sequence where she was the mountain girl. Still, the technological aspects of this movie cannot be overlooked. This is why the Babylon sequence is my favourite of the film. All those sets are 1-to-1. All those extras are actually there. I do miss movies where you can actually see how many people are in the frame. I got bored of CGI extras a long time ago in a galaxy far, far away.
Are you mad? Or do you wish my son death?
No, madame, I love him.
I know that's what you have done is stupid and reckless.
This is another one of the smaller appearances by Catherine, and this time round she doesn't have too much impact on the plot. The opening scenes of the 1971 Mary Queen of Scots movie took place at the French court in the last days of Francois II's reign. Catherine appears as an antagonistic figure towards Mary, blaming the Scottish Queen for the decline in her son's health and his ultimate death. As a result of her coldness and antagonism, Mary has little desire to stay in France and ultimately makes her decision to return to Scotland. Here Catherine is played by a French former ballerina. As such, she does retain something of a French accent in the few lines that she speaks. This film perpetuates the idea that Catherine never liked Mary and always wished her ill, to the extent that she isn't present to bid Mary goodbye when she does leave and just watches gleefully from a window. As a result, Catherine is shown as a toxic boy mom who couldn't stand to share her son with another woman. It also goes to show that no matter where Mary went, there was always someone who couldn't stand her to be where they wanted to be. Catherine in France, John Knox in Scotland, and Elizabeth in England. But now we're past the smaller contributions and the irrevocably evil portrayals. Now we can explore the more human Catherines.
I want to speak to you as a colleague. I read your book. It is astonishing. I've been working with Ruggiero for years. Do you know him?
No.
It was a tad trickier to find this movie. Turns out there are lots of movies called Nostradamus, and only one of them is actually about the man himself. This long-forgotten film is available on YouTube, but sadly only in 240p, so that's why the resolution isn't that great. I'm surprised that something with a hefty dose of sex and violence was allowed to remain on YouTube. I can only guess that it's not monetized. Anyway, the movie covers the life of Michel de Nostradam, whose name they pronounce accurately throughout. I'm still going to say Nostradamus for shorthand. It starts from when he is attending medical school and begins treating plague victims, finding ways to keep people healthy during moments of outbreak. He later leaves to study with Jules César Scaliger, as well as create and lose his first family. Throughout, he experiences a series of visions, some that will happen in the distant future and others that will happen very soon. He prophesies the death of King Henri II and attains Catherine de Medici as his patroness, who believes in his predictions. Amanda Plummer was a surprisingly deep Catherine. From the way she speaks, she does sound a little unhinged. But her first scene demonstrates her precarious patience in the presence of her husband and his mistress. Previous scenes had Nostradamus mention that Catherine has been humiliated for years by Henri and Diane, and she has to hide her utter contempt when the latter recommends when she can spend time with her own husband. This is clearly someone biding her time. Strangely, she is already shown wearing black, but I guess it's to both signify who she is early on, as well as to show that she is much more reserved and modest than Henri and Diane. Catherine, upon hearing Nostradamus' prediction of the king's death, is actually okay with this happening, both to deliver herself from years of humiliation, but also to save France from her husband's warmongering. And of course, it doesn't hurt that she will also become regent of France. The movie does not doubt the validity of Nostradamus' prophecies. There are scenes when he actually witnesses battles from World War II, and a German soldier is shot right in front of him. And then later, he paints a massive swastika on the wall, not knowing what it means. I'm guessing the writers forgot that before it was adopted by the Nazis, the swastika was originally an ancient symbol for good luck. It's possible that someone as learned as Nostradamus might have known what it meant. The movie can be pretty good at times, especially in terms of costuming and recreating a feel of 16th century France, but it does get a few small details wrong. For example, when Catherine introduces Nostradamus to her children, both Francois and Mary Stuart are shown as pretty young, even though they would have been in their mid-teens. And all the young children appear to be close in age. Nostradamus envisions all of the children covered in blood and tells Catherine that her sons will become king, but she will outlive them. Either Nostradamus got that wrong, seeing as only 3 of her sons became king, and she died before Henri III's death, or his vision of seeing Catherine's children and Mary Queen of Scots covered in blood made him realise that all of them were going to be involved in acts of unspeakable violence. Nonetheless, Catherine accepts that this is what will happen and it cannot be changed, stating that she will prepare herself for what is to come, and wishes Nostradamus strength as he continues his mission of figuring out his visions. Catherine is next shown in the joust, where Henri is mortally wounded. Honestly, every time the joust does happen on this list, it is shown in different context, so there's always an interesting way to show this one scene. I believe this is the only one where Catherine actually knows what will happen, and she does nothing to change it, and is reserved and calm while everyone else is in shock. I'll talk about the context and portrayal of the infamous joust in the rest of this list. Here it was a foregone conclusion, and confirmation to Catherine that everything Nostradamus predicted will come true, and she can't take comfort in her husband's death, knowing that she will have to witness her children's deaths as well. She spares Nostradamus from being tortured for causing the king's death through black magic. Interestingly, with her husband dead, she is now taken to wearing white instead of black. Yes, white was also a mourning colour, and I guess it does have a stark contrast to what she was wearing early on, but I don't know why they didn't have it the other way round. This movie is oh so very flawed, but it's better than a lot of the bad stuff I've been looking at recently. It's just a shame it's been forgotten so quickly.
Give your queen my compliments and say I am impatient for the day when I may call her daughter.
Elizabeth R, being a very short miniseries, covers one significant series of events in Elizabeth I's life per episode. Episode 3, Shadow of the Sun, takes place in the 1570s, with Elizabeth now well into her reign, but still not secure on her throne. In order to make peace with the bloodthirsty France, Catherine de' Medici's youngest son Hercule, or Francois, I call him Hercule to differentiate him from his oldest brother, the Duc d'Alençon / Duc d'Anjou, is proposed as a suitor. As well as events taking place at the English court, there are corresponding events happening in France as Catherine is represented as the true leader. Both Henri III and Charles IX are nowhere to be seen. Catherine appears in an almost flawless segue from England to France. Robert Dudley is flirting with Lettice Knollys, when he is instantly distracted by Elizabeth calling him from off-screen, then cutting to two jesters dressed as Elizabeth and Dudley acting out a crude play for Catherine's entertainment, showing no matter whom he marries, Elizabeth will always come first. But also, it demonstrates how infamous the relationship between them is known throughout the rest of the world, and that it's gained the ridicule of other European courts. Catherine clearly doesn't have much respect for Elizabeth if she's willing to make fun of her like this. I must also add, there appears to have been a time skip between the English court scene and the beginning of the French court scene, as the ambassador states that the St. Bartholomew's Day massacre was some time ago. Anjou as the Dauphin is now much more appealing marriage stock. In the BBC Tudor trilogy, that being The Shadow of the Tower, Six Wives of Henry VIII and Elizabeth R, there hasn't been much scrutiny in making sure that all characters have correct accents. Some would put on one to show that they were indeed Spanish, French or Scottish, but there were others who would just speak in their regular voice. Margaretta Scott, being English, could have done this, but instead has decided to play Catherine with an accurate Italian accent. I've heard it said that an English speaker putting on an Italian accent is a bit tricky, because if you can't pull it off properly, you kind of sound like Mario. Fortunately, Scott managed it. She spent most of her career in Shakespearean roles, but surprisingly doesn't appear in any of the BBC television Shakespeare adaptations. I don't know for certain if Catherine's reputation may have influenced Shakespeare on any of his plays, although there are a lot of villainous female characters like Queen Tamara and Lady Macbeth who may have carried a sliver of inspiration. Scott's Catherine rarely raises her voice, but her sarcasm demonstrates her deep disappointment in her son. By this point, he has been an embarrassment by switching sides in the wars of religion. Catherine doesn't appear to be held responsible for the St. Bartholomew's Day massacre, but she's clearly somewhat responsible. The English are more concerned with avoiding bloodshed in their own country, although some of the more devout Protestants think they should deal with the Catholics in kind. Elizabeth wants to avoid mass murder at all costs. With Hercule having sympathy for Huguenots, Catherine shows her special brand of conditional affection in order to convince him to marry Elizabeth, although he is slightly worried that Elizabeth will be like his mother. Catherine is never seen outside of this one chamber, and wears the same costume, although that is the BBC in the 1970s for you. News is brought to her and she responds to it, but no matter how inconvenient the news is, she keeps a kind diplomatic persona, even admitting her pity for Elizabeth, who will never have children. I honestly thought she had more scenes. She certainly deserved more scenes, but after so many Catherines up to this point who are usually painted so unsympathetically, it's a breath of fresh air to have a Catherine who, while not entirely evil, has a level head and clearly has some affection for her children, even if they did not turn out the way she intended. It's kind of funny though that out of all her children, only one of them was seen in the episode.
When you find life conspiring against you, you must find a way to change it to your favour, no matter what the cost. You must be willing to make sacrifices. If you don't teach your enemies a lesson, then they'll never learn. I have always had a strong imagination, as if I could see things before they happened. Sometimes it feels like I can make them happen.
Oh, great. We're back here again. Granted, I don't think we'll need to come back a third time unless the second season features Elizabeth I.
What? Fuck.
The Serpent Queen seemed to have a lot of potential. Then I remembered it was made by Stars. Samantha Morton plays the primary interpretation of Catherine, but a significant chunk of the first 3 episodes show a bunch of flashbacks from her childhood in Florence right up until her first pregnancy. Obviously, you couldn't pass off Morton for a teenager, so they needed to cast a younger actress. Looking at this makes me wonder how I would handle other projects like a theatrical literary hot takes on David Copperfield, where there is always going to be a younger and an older version of the same character. There's also the first 10 chapters of Jane Eyre, but we'll cross that bridge if we come to it. The framing device for the flashbacks is that Catherine, now widowed and in the wake of Francois II's death, she sees herself in the new serving girl Rahima and tells her the story of her life up until the present, with Rahima having to figure out which side she wants to be on. As of July 2024, the second season is about to air, but I'm not in the best position to watch it, seeing as Stars isn't available in the UK and I'd have to go through the malarkey of going through Amazon Prime. So we'll bide our time and focus on the first season for now. But I will also make a few thoughts via the second season trailer. By the way, YouTube, thanks for letting me know about that. Catherine goes from a powerless teen used for the advancement of others to the one holding the reins of power and pushing all her enemies to the side. It took a few viewings of Morton's performance for me to make up my mind about her. Consider that I was watching Reign intermittently at the same time, so I was already comparing her with Megan Follows. Catherine, in the present state, where she is mentoring Rahima, is emotionally reserved to the point where you can't tell if she's being genuinely kind or if she's planning to kill you. It's almost like she's doing her own version of Miranda Priestley from The Devil Wears Prada, where she is actually kind of scary in the fact that she never raises her voice. But the flashbacks explain how any true emotiveness on her part was browbeaten and sucked out of her after years of humiliation. She was never able to have a proper relationship with her husband, and even her children, particularly Francois, is being swayed by others like the Guises. Catherine's final act in the first season, where she is the one to crown Charles, is her way of asserting control over her children again, for better or for worse. One thing in this series' favour is showing the disturbing age gap that was the relationship between Henri II and Diane de Poitiers. Diane is frequently shown as much younger than she was, often making her appear to be the same age as Henri. But as they keep the same actress, Ludovine Sagnier, another Sagnier, is it? Anyway, they keep the same actress throughout, and as a result the age disparity is very obvious. I didn't know where to put this in the history video, but it is entirely possible that after being traumatised by his experience in Spain, Diane may have groomed Henri to the point where he always had her nearby, and they developed a kind of codependence. Whether she likes Catherine is uncertain, but does see her cousin as necessary for France itself, as she's the one needed to produce legitimate heirs. As awful as the rest of the series is, at least, Catherine was well acted by both Morton and Hill. The rest of the cast, with the exception of a few, who aren't written as potty-mouthed douchebags, managed to scrape a reasonable performance. This series is incredibly difficult to watch because half the time the characters really piss me off. As a result of its quality, there was this huge stretch of time between when I watched the first 4 episodes versus when I watched the last 4 episodes. The timeline is also all over the place. Francois I lives much longer than he did in real life. The infamous joust is to celebrate Mary and Francois' marriage instead, and Catherine becomes pregnant a lot sooner than she did. Even though she married Henri in 1533, the first episode states that Catherine is still living in Florence in 1536. For a series that actually claimed to take inspiration from an actual biography of Catherine, the interest in telling a historically accurate story clearly became less and less of a priority. If that is supposed to be Charles V, where is your chin, sir? And I still can't believe they're having Elizabeth I show up at the French court. As far as I'm aware, in her lifetime, Elizabeth never left the British Isles. I know she never went to Scotland, and maybe she went to Wales on Progress, but that seems to be about it. and she may have gone to Calais when England still owned Calais, but I don't see why a Protestant queen would go to an emphatically Catholic country. Yes, Henri of Navarre did, but that was to get married. And let's talk about the joust. Like with Nostradamus, Catherine approaches it with the awareness that Henri is fated to die violently. In her case, she had a dream where she kills Diane, but Henri dies as well. She doesn't know it's a foregone conclusion. Consulting Ruggieri, he tells her that the price of getting rid of Diane will be Henri's death. Even though it happens as she predicted, she doesn't actually want it to happen and tries to get him to stop. But Henri, referencing a conversation he had with Francois in an earlier scene where he states he must be his own man, decides to go once more just to call Catherine's bluff. Diane manages to remain at Henri's side and goes behind Catherine's back to work out a way to save him, using convicted prisoners as test subjects. But in the end, her actions only speed up Henri's actual death. Even though the death shocked Catherine, she kept her composure until she could find someone to blame for it. The second season trailer sounds as if Catherine has gained a little more malevolent glee in her constant bloodshed. We'll wait to talk about that until I can watch the series for myself. I can hardly contain my excitement.
And this, my daughter, is the Countess de Brezé, one of the fairest ornaments of our court.
The Countess de Brezé. You are a widow, madam?
No, Your Highness.
Your husband is not with you at court?
He is somewhat indisposed, Your Highness.
I literally just saw it. No. Ah, here it is. Back to the obscure. I'm surprised it doesn't have the same... Oh, it's rattling around. I can't really wave this around when it rattles around in its casing, so I'm just going to put it down. Back away slowly. I'm surprised it doesn't have the same prevalence as other period pieces from this time, although a lot of the dramas from the 1950s tend to be very difficult to find. I don't know why. The DVD I got was an Italian release, but thankfully it kept the English audio. The film was originally an unpublished manuscript, and then it was adapted into a screenplay by none other than Christopher Isherwood. If that name sounds familiar, he wrote the original story behind Cabaret. He was quite proud of what he wrote, but he suffered the classic Hollywood writer's experience of a passion project being robbed of his control. Poor baby. The film instead became a vehicle for the blonde bombshell Lana Turner, who played Diane de Poitiers, a woman whom Turner thought was an interesting figure who used her charm for intelligence. Turner had a veto on who would be cast as her co-star Henri II, who would eventually be Roger Moore, a good 17 years before his first James Bond movie. Marissa Pavan serves as the third part of this love triangle. They had the sense to cast an Italian actress for Catherine, whose darker features strikingly contrast Lana Turner's famous blonde hair and blue eyes. Most of Catherine's more villainous attributes have been lifted out in favour of her being a slightly sympathetic, if untrustworthy rival to Diane. She longs to be loved by Henri in the same way he loves Diane, though often has to watch as he repeatedly showers his affection on another. The real salt in the wound is when her children refer to her as Aunt Diane. At least baby Henri can't run off from her, hence why she holds on to him so tightly. It's been a while since I saw a period piece that was just so colourful. Yes, the Serpent Queen did have some vibrant costumes, but the male characters in most 16th century dramas, they always have to wear muted colours if they aren't a bishop or a cardinal, or they just wear black or brown. And you would never see a male character in a Star series wearing Roger Moore's bright purple doublet with the H and D interwound initials on the sleeves. I do love that extra touch of having Henri and Diane's initials interwoven in all places. Don't you just miss how saturated in colour that movies used to be? Catherine still cares about Henri, even if he doesn't care about her. Early on, she begs Ruggieri, who has been composited with Nostradamus in this movie, for a solution to get Henri to love her. But instead, he tells her to consider her destiny. After consulting a crystal ball, an omen of a wild boar in a golden cage, as well as that of Gabrielle de Montgomery, looms over Catherine. Montgomery is rewritten to be Henri's closest friend. Ruggieri realises that Montgomery will end up killing Henri, but doesn't tell Catherine for her peace of mind. What appears to be the prophecy occurs when Henri is injured by a boar on a hunt, but Catherine remains scared of the idea of a wild boar, even one at a feast. Henri laughs off her superstition. Diane, meanwhile, tries to appear more diplomatic and helps Catherine through their public appearances, even if it's not appreciated. This time around, Catherine has no knowledge of what's to happen in the joust, though the omen of the wild boar in the golden cage still persists. The context for the joust this time is that, via Diane's advice to make peace, Henri has made an alliance with the Duke of Savoy, an enemy of the Medici family. Obviously, Catherine is against this, and without her knowledge, her advisor, Albert de Gondi, or is it Alberto de Gondi? Anyway, he conspires to have the king murdered in the joust by putting a fake, breakable cover over the assassin's lance, intended to impale Henri. This here is a perfect example of dramatic irony, as well as Hitchcock's bomb under the table. If you go into the movie knowing its history, you know that Henri will die. There is no changing that. So the joust scene is a slow build towards the climax, with the deadly lance unknowingly being picked up by Montgomery, and his shield is dented, so he has to switch it out with an Italian one that happens to have a boar on it. Ruggeri's servant Fiero realises this is a prophecy and loudly begs the king not to ride. Catherine realises it too moments before the joust begins, and that is how Henri is fatally injured. This makes it the first of the two depictions where the injury was a deliberate assassination attempt. Catherine, seizing on her jealousy, orders Diane arrested so she can tend to her husband, and takes the ring which Diane gave him. She allows the two to meet briefly before she claims him back. There's ominous music as she closes the door, so are they hinting that Catherine gave Henri a merciful death with poison to end his suffering? She works out very quickly that Gondi was behind her husband's death, which he declares was all done for the House of Medici. Catherine, who has learned a lot from his tutelage, wants him tortured and the plot exposed, but he takes his own life before the truth can get out.
I make you mistress of France, and am paid, as all are paid, who serve the Medici.
And thus, Catherine becomes the deadly, bloodthirsty queen history remembers her to be. But her humanity is not completely gone, as out of love for Henri, she returns the ring to Diane at the last minute. Pavan is fortunately able to control the balance between Catherine's inherent dark side in her Medici blood, and that of a woman who was denied the love she so desired. I do wish more people knew about this movie. It's so hard to find anything like it anymore.
Bien m'embrasser, mon fils. Tu as été brave hier à la chasse. Ton bras a conservé un fils. Merci.
There are two different edits of this movie. I watched the 138-minute American cut because this was the one that was available to me on DVD at short notice on World of Books, and I haven't seen the 160-minute definitive edition, but I don't think I want to. Lauren Margot is probably one of the most violent pieces of entertainment I have seen. I guess it's because the vast amounts of bloodshed hit harder here because it's a depiction of something that actually happened. You're watching a deliberate act of genocide. Acts such as these are still happening even today. This movie was released in May of 1994 when the ethnic cleansing in Rwanda was still going on. I watched the movie first and then tried to read the book because I was certain that Alexandre Dumas didn't write a scene where Margot just wanders onto the streets of Paris on her wedding night to get railed by the first hot guy she makes eye contact with. Emphasis on tried to read the book. I had the same problem with this as I did with reading The Three Musketeers. Alexandre Dumas takes forever to get the plot moving along. Half the time it's just pages long conversations of no plot development and two characters just going, "Pas Dieu, Monsieur d'Artagnan! Pas Dieu, Monsieur Coconnas!" Coconas. Even listening to the audiobook, I nearly fell asleep. And I was on a train when I fell asleep. So, that's a hazard. It's definitely one of those movies where the casting does most of the heavy lifting. Yes, it was nominated for an Oscar for Best Costuming, but the majority of the awards the movie won, across the numerous ceremonies, was for its acting, with Werner Lisi winning 3 at Cannes, the Caesar Awards, and Nastro d'Argento. Once again, authenticity is adhered to by casting another Italian actress. The first thing to notice about her is that they do not show her as conventionally pretty, which an American-made film probably would have done. She is pale, wrinkled, her hair is sparsely decorated, and her clothes are the most extravagant thing about her. In a court where all the women make themselves look beautiful to earn the desire of other men, Catherine doesn't feel the need to. The story of La Reine Margot spans from the events of the marriage of Margot and Henri of Navarre until the death of Charles IX, with many events condensed down and altered in order to fit the narrative. The character of La Mole, for instance, wasn't a Protestant in real life, and he wasn't executed as a frame-up for killing King Charles, although Margot did have his head preserved and then kept it as a trophy. Much like Shakespeare's Richard III, it is responsible for peddling a lot of rumours about the Valois family that originated from Bourbon and Protestant propaganda. Catherine is thus shown as the key architect behind the massacre. Her plan was always to have Henri marry Margot so prime Huguenots will be murdered alongside Coligny. She insists that she still loves her remaining children, but it is clear to everyone with half a brain cell that her son Anjou is her real favourite. I'm not the only one who thinks Anjou looks like Gary Oldman's Dracula, am I? Actually, which came first? Sorry, we're going off script here. I need to know which one came out first. So, La Reine Margot came out in 1994, and Bram Stoker's Dracula came out in 1992. Right, because I was like thinking maybe one influenced the other, so when Dracula's all dressed in his muscle armour with his long hair, maybe that was the inspiration for Anjou in this. Or maybe it was a coincidence. I mean, Charles IX also looks a bit like Gary Oldman. Throughout the movie, Catherine makes numerous attempts to kill Henri of Navarre in order to destroy the Protestant figurehead. He manages to hide from the massacre. Margot stops him from kissing his mistress, who unknowingly put on poison lipstick. Charles stops him from walking into an ambush after Henri saved his life in a hunt. And finally, Catherine has a poison-lined book left in his rooms. Unfortunately, she put Alençon to this task, and instead of Henri finding the book first, well...
Qu'est-ce que t'as? T'es tout pâle.
Catherine works out that it was her blind ambition that caused her son's death, and she is forced to watch helplessly as he dies. But even then, she needs someone to blame for it. Rather than adhere to Charles' request for her to just burn the book, she notices that La Mole was the previous owner, which he sold to Catherine's poisoner René Bianchi earlier in the movie, after he'd been robbed. The book is also present in the novel, although blame La Mole all you like, but Charles's real downfall was being one of those creeps that licks their finger before turning a page. Ugh. You're just damaging the paper and spreading germs. The death of Charles and the return of Anjou from Poland makes Catherine all the more determined to keep her favourite son alive. The dynamic between the two in particular is so Oedipal, it's only a matter of time before Henri gouges his eyes out. The idea that the Valois, or what was left of them, were incestuous with one another is a false rumour that Alexandre Dumas added into his story. Still, at least this Catherine didn't bite her own daughter on the arse.
You called them animals. Soldiers. Laughing. That sound you couldn't forget. They didn't make it in time, did they? In Florence.
The first lesson I ever learned was never to wait for a man's rescue. History is written by the survivors. And I am surely that.
Bet you didn't think this show would ever top a rankings list. Rain haters are probably fuming right now. I didn't think this series would be good. The first episode was terrible. And then Megan Follows Catherine began to grow on me. It started with her threats to burn people's villages to the ground to get information, cashing in on her own reputation.
One of you knows who did this, and they will come forward by midnight. If not, I will send my guards to your villages and burn each of your homes to the ground.
12 o'clock midnight.
Well, out with it then. Contrary to public opinion, I do not relish destroying people's homes.
But what cemented her as the best Catherine was this one scene from episode 7 where she ate and left no crumbs.
I know exactly what this is like. When I was 8 years old, rebels stormed the Florentine palace. They demanded that I be turned over to them so that I would be shared.
With 4 seasons and the only cast member besides Adelaide Kane to appear in every single episode of the series, There was plenty of time and opportunities to turn Catherine into somewhat of an anti-villain. Or is it anti-hero? She sort of goes back and forth. Her primary goal is to look out for her children and see that they are safe and secure in their position. Unfortunately, as we all know, Catherine's going to lose a bunch of her children. The only one of them to die during the events of the series was Francois, which was prophesied by Nostradamus from the very beginning. Despite the French court being the only location shown for quite some time in the show, what it has become is never shown in the time skip in the final episode, and neither Mary nor Elizabeth comment on what's been happening in France. Catherine is last seen summoning Margot home to court. There's a lot of explaining behind that, but it's hinted that after years of doing terrible things in order to put her children's welfare first, Catherine is advised to keep Margot close. Hang on a sec, my corset is coming undone. Unfortunately, the ending of Reign is very convoluted because the show was cancelled and they had to wrap up all the storylines, leaving most of them unfinished. I'll talk more of this when I finally wrap up the series. Even though a lot of the plot points in Reign are fictional, the way Catherine goes about things can arguably be in character for her, and she knows her way around manipulating people and using them for allies. Even people she saw as enemies and rivals like Mary and her ladies eventually receive her amity and generosity. Writing an out-and-out evil version of Catherine would have become stale very, very quickly, and the two of them share a shaky alliance that turns into a genuine mother-daughter relationship. One thing I admire the show for is its subversion of female character dynamics, where rather than be at each other's throats, a lot of them find they can work better together, and even in their final encounter, Mary and Catherine part on good terms. The only time Catherine does act out of character is when she doesn't realise she's poisoning herself. But we'll get to that in a moment. I would have really loved a scene at the end where Catherine mourns Mary's imminent death because she associates her with Francois' memory. Catherine stops being an antagonist early on, mainly because King Henri II goes mad.
Invasion. Oh dear. No trousers.
It's not explained why in the first season, although the other characters deduce it was over the guilt of killing his older brother. In season 2, it turns out the Bourbons poisoned Henri's Bible, which Catherine herself was reading after his death, and she started experiencing similar symptoms to Henri, where she hallucinated people from her past and was convinced to kill those closest to her. It dredges up a deep trauma regarding her dead twin daughters whom, it turns out, were killed by Diane de Poitiers out of spite. This leads to my favourite scene in the whole goddamn show, and I really hope Megan was having fun when they filmed this. For real though, with everything the real Catherine had to endure, surely she must have fantasised about something like this. Megan Follows was undoubtedly the best thing about this series. She took it seriously, but wasn't uptight. At no point did she ever phone in a performance. I'd love to know what the cast dynamic was like on this set. Call me crazy, maybe I've been reading Henri's Bible, but her performance in Reign is kind of like the villains in the early Barbie movies. Like, our expectations were middling at best. You didn't have to bring so much A-game into this role, but you did, and we love you for it. Ah yes, let's talk about the joust before I run out of word count. Like with Diane, the joust is another assassination plot, which Catherine knows nothing about. I was surprised about this depiction for two reasons. One, even though Nostradamus is in the main cast and has had plenty of visions throughout the season which affect key events, he never predicts Henri's death, which would have been very easy to include, even if he didn't tell Catherine. And two, even if Nostradamus didn't have the vision, there was no foreshadowing leading up to it. The context this time around is that France has just triumphed in conflict against the English and taken back Calais. Mary I is dead, and Henri wants to lead a campaign to put Mary Stuart on the English throne. Unbeknownst to everyone, he also plans to poison his son and marry Mary, so he can be king of 3 countries. Remember, he's gone crazy. Earlier in the episode, he showed just how unhinged he is by blowing up a ship that was meant to be used for a play, with dozens of innocent people aboard. Francois realises the only way to save France from Henri is to put his father down, so he knocks out Montgomery, nicks his armour, and faces down his father in the joust, being the one to fatally injure him, and the consequences carry over into the next season. More Catherines like this, please, although it still sucks we didn't get to see her kill Sebastian as well as his mother. The final video about Catherine will also touch on the myths surrounding the Valois dynasty during its decline, and why their enemies felt the need to make up such insane stories about them. Catherine may or may not have been the killer queen history remembers her to be, but one thing we cannot call her is selfish. Maybe she told herself she did it all for her children, just to ease her own conscience. And yet, after looking at the history, it seems that a lot of the bloodshed was blamed on her, and it was mostly down to the Guises and their fellow militants who wanted to rule France through the Valois, and each king, following Henri II, became more and more weak and susceptible to the Guise faction. I don't think there was any way you could have saved the Valois family, despite Catherine's efforts. If you thought British history in the 16th century was bloody, France must have been 10 times the slaughterhouse England was by the time King Henri IV finally took his place. And yet there was still violence, corruption and extravagance that would carry on through the successive Bourbon kings until eventually they would meet their fate at the Place de Révolution in 1793. Taking a step back, Catherine de' Medici appears to have been a lone figure of reason trying to hold back against the tide of chaos and violence. It's a shame that only so many of her on-screen portrayals actually show what a complex person she was, but I continue to hope that we will improve as we continue onwards and endeavour to separate fact from fiction. I apologise for the crackling, there is a bloody magpie outside. Anyway, video's over. I'm sorry that there are no captions this time. I'm very much stretched for time. I don't have time to make the captions. I will make up for this eventually when we get to that Rain review. We'll have Rain Hunger Games. Double quarter quell. So yeah, I'm going on a bit of hiatus in August and September because I'm going down to London for a couple months. And I'm going to be working on some scripts, but mostly I'm going to just be recovering from the immense burnout I've been having for the past several months. Usually it's not so bad. This light is very, very bright, I've just realised. That's better. Usually it's not so bad because every few months it's like, oh, we need you for a theatre job. And like that's a week or two doing something else. And then I come back to the YouTubes and I feel a bit better about it. But this time, no, it's just been straight YouTube for like 8 months and I really need to be doing something else right now. I'm just very, very burned out. If we're lucky, we'll get the Pride and Prejudice hot takes out on the 31st for YouTube, probably earlier if you're early access on Patreon. If you want to continue supporting the channel during my hiatus, please make sure you subscribe, like the video, watch the rest of the videos, like them, leave comments, all that stuff. As promised, I did the Black Swan makeup that I was going to do last time, but I didn't have enough time. Not bad for a first attempt. I thought it was going to take at least 2 more attempts. I started looking at tutorial, but once I got in the black eyeshadow shape I just sort of improvise with different shades of eyeshadow because I got silver eyeshadow or silver greyish eyeshadow, and then I had some white eyeshadow, and I just sort of went along with it because I think if you can paint you can do a lot with makeup. And yes, I'm going to be doing the in front of the camera segments for the Pride and Prejudice hot takes like this because why waste a good thing? Might wear this eye makeup for the rest of the day. And before we go, I must thank my patrons. Alan is also here. He's going to thank the patrons too. Hey Alan, what do you want to say to the patrons? Turn the damn light off. That's what he's saying. Thank you to my patrons. You can find their names in the credits here. No matter which tier you sign up to, you'll always get your name in the credits. Thank you so much to my King and Queen patrons as well. They're the highest level contributors. Alison Cuff, Anna from Gustine, Annalise Barnett, Jill My Nero, Larissa and Leslie Williams. I'll see you next time.